Good morning. It's Monday, February 5th, 2018. Over the weekend, at the request of District 8's County Commissioner Daniella Levine Cava, I had the privilege of making a short food for thought presentation at the start of the Transportation Solutions Summit hosted by the Commissioner. Here's a slightly expanded version of that presentation. I was inspired to add a little bit at the end by that creative conversation I heard all morning among more than 100 citizens and experts and elected officials. Now, South Dade residents are just known for being sensitive about the chronic traffic issues here. It seems like there are just too many of us trying to find space on the road at the same time. Trouble is, Americans have been hearing we're running out of roads since at least 1947. And despite spending trillions of dollars and building lurching spasms of concrete to add capacity to our system, all we succeeded in doing was to convince more of us to drive more and more of the time. We succeeded in causing a shift from the family car to the personal car. Now, one or more cars per person over age 16. And in making our households dependent on the car for everything. I'm going to explain why the spending on road widening and highway building made the problem we were trying to solve worse, and issue a challenge about what we could do instead. For the record, I rode my bike here today, so don't blame me for the traffic. The highway infrastructure intended to speed things up, to get us moving again, looks like it was devised so we could finally go faster. But what really happened was it just encouraged us to use that time to range farther, to drive till we qualify, to push more sprawl outward, and to drive alone, by ourselves in the car most of the time. The futurist Heimstra nailed it. We have to address the causes of the suburban traffic congestion, not just the symptoms. The causes aren't hard to discern. Our daily activities are just too far apart. Our street networks are just too disconnected and tree-like instead of grid-like. And that forces each trip onto the same roads and intersections with everybody else at the same time. Our auto-oriented street scenes are also hostile environments for walking and biking. And our transit alternatives are pretty weak. But 600,000 additional people will live in Miami-Dade by 2040, maybe more. More people will follow them. If they all do what we've done for decades, that's drive alone, long distances for everything, the traffic will, of course, get a whole lot worse. But we're not the Soviet Union, and we're not going to tell them they can't come here. And maybe we can use the new demand to grow our way out of some of our problems. We just need to get a much bigger percentage of these new folks to choose short local trips, walking trips, biking trips, and transit trips much more often. And we need to get a larger percentage of those of us who already live here to do so too. It's already too hard to drive. We ran a little head-to-head test during rush hour a few months ago. Ralph got on Metro Rail and went from Dadeland South to Brickell in under 13 minutes. Alfred hopped on his bike and he pedaled up the underline, coming in second. I drove and I came in dead last. It took me more than 3 times as long to drive as it took Ralph to ride transit. There were just too many other people in cars trying to do exactly the same thing I was doing. There's a basic geometry problem in depending on cars for everything. They take too much space. In the picture on the left, you can see how much space it takes for a busload of 40 or 60 to occupy a bus or trolley. In the center picture, you can see how much space it takes for the same number of us on bikes. It's slightly more. But in the photo at right, you can see what happens when each person has a car. There will never be enough room. Here's another way to visualize the same thing. 400 cars versus 400 bus passengers versus 400 people on a train. I'm going to use Walter Kulash's classic diagram to explain why building highways and adding lanes just generates more cars and more traffic. In the ideal world of 1960s or 1970s transportation planning, traffic engineers assumed that as the years go by, the demand would rise, until one day it exceeds the theoretical capacity of the road. This goes along for a few more frustrating years until eventually someone says, we've run out of road, and so the road is widened, or a new highway is built, or an intersection is turned into a big interchange, all to add capacity. In theory, the system would then finally have the capacity needed to satisfy the demand, and equilibrium will be restored, and peace will reign. Of course, what really happens is the supersized road just unlocked more sprawl and more latent demand for ever longer trips, and the so-called improvements metastasize the streets into ugly highways that make walking, biking, and transit even less feasible than ever. So new car trips are the inevitable result, and before you know it, the traffic jam has returned. This idea of induced travel demand has only been widely understood for the last 20 years or so. Each time we try to add motoring capacity, the new lanes and highways then bring more cars and more sprawl and more traffic. So the real question isn't whether you're going to have congestion. Streets like US 1 are going to be congested at the peak hour from now until the end of time. The real question is, at how many lanes would you like to finally embrace the inevitability of that congestion and get on with the business of making livable towns? And get on with making it easy to choose walking, biking, and transit instead. We can't keep repeating the experiment expecting different results. So what are the answers? The key to managing the car traffic isn't focusing on the car traffic. It's focusing on building more complete and connected communities that have more of the workplaces, entertainment places, gathering places, and housing we need where we need them, thereby shortening many car trips and eliminating others in the process. We can make those better places out of the communities we've already started. Even on US 1. We'll also need to make it a much better place to walk. The answers include making walking our highest priority mode of transportation, not an afterthought. The answers also include making people on bikes feel welcome and safe. And of course, the answers include implementing transit, like we really mean for people to use it this time. Of course, in Miami-Dade we have some walking, biking, and transit going on already. But ask yourself, have we really implemented the physical infrastructure for these as if we really meant for them to be a top quality first choice, better than driving? And what would our world look like if we did? Well, it wouldn't look like this when you try to cross the street. Safety has been improving for people walking around here, but our record compared to our peer cities cries out for much more improvement. It wouldn't look like this when you try to ride your bike along the Metrorail path or the Underline or the South Dade Trail. Note in the center of this picture the crossing signal. You're seeing J driving in action. And it wouldn't look like this when you try to use transit. How can we say we've lived up to our obligations to protect the public health, safety, and welfare if this elderly fellow can't even find shade at the bus stop? If he ends up in the emergency room later today, he'll be diagnosed with heat stroke or dehydration, and people will question the sanity of his choice to walk to the bus stop in the first place, as if he had a choice. In reality, his community should be diagnosed with street tree deficiency, and his community should be diagnosed with a depleted sense of place and a bus shelter defect. And last, our land use patterns and our urban design will look different on the key transit corridors and in our gathering places. Right now, we have a lot of lost space because we have so many one-story buildings sticking out of parking lots. The streets themselves need reconfiguring, for sure. But we also need to knit this back together the spread out communities, at least at their centers. Elected officials, here's a test. This is from the great engineer Ian Lockwood. You can use this test with virtually every decision you are ever called on to make. It can be a budget decision, a decision about what to fund and build, a policy decision, or a zoning decision. If the action you are taking rewards the short car trip, and it rewards walking, biking, or transit trips, it's almost always going to be the right thing to do where traffic is concerned. These are the options that have the most compelling return on investment. We do have to learn to ask the right questions. We have to overcome the brainwashing we've grown up with and stop worshiping the idea that anything that increases the level of service for auto trips is a good thing. Instead, we ought to ask, how can we move fewer people, fewer miles, while still enjoying a dynamic economy and a prosperous, high quality of life? There's even a term for this among us wonks, VMT. How can we reduce the vehicle miles traveled per person per year? When we hear of a new development bringing higher density and mixed land uses to the transitway corridor, instead of just assuming it will make traffic worse, we should scrutinize how well it can be designed to reduce our combined travel in cars. In this way, development can be part of the solution rather than just more of the problem. Ask yourself, how should the community be set up so it's easy to choose the green mobility options? What if we set an audacious goal? Today, in 2018, South Dade makes about 1.5% of our trips via walking, biking, and transit combined. But what if it didn't have to always be this way? What if we shot for 25% within a couple decades? Why not? Achieving a big goal like that will take time, but it doesn't require rocket science. First, no matter what our transit technology, we'll need walkable places where we exit the train or the bus or the trolley. Transit stations belong at the center of community life when we leave the vehicle. It's what's outside the turnstiles that matters most. South Floridians will find their own way to make compact, complete, connected places with new transit-oriented development along the Metro Rail and transitway corridors. The SMART plan really isn't just about transportation, it's about land use. For South Dade, the key is to get the growth to occur along the transitway, not out west in the farmland or in the Everglades. There is tremendous untapped potential along the transitway. 11% of the parcels are completely vacant, and many more are deeply underutilized. We're not running out of room to build within the urban development boundary. But we need to focus the development industry and the whole of government on these underutilized parcels. We need to imagine a new generation of growth near the transit stations. Transit-oriented development can accommodate the population growth and improve our quality of life and sense of place at the same time, make it look better, and support the shift from cars to transit and to non-motorized ways of moving around. Second, we'll have to invest in the whole menu of transit options. We'll have to do it for real this time, and we'll have to spend the money making the transit rider's experience absolutely great. Remember, that transit rider made the choice to leave their car keys at home. So even if you insist on driving yourself that day, be grateful they aren't in yet another car, in your way, in the same lane, on the same streets. Third, we'll need to take full advantage of the exploding menu of high-tech and low-tech ways of moving around. Already the menu of choices has been expanding thanks to new technology, and it's bound to expand more. As it does, more and more of us will subscribe to some forms of mobility as a service, and eventually we'll need individual cars less and less, and we'll need a lot less parking spaces for them. Next, we need to plant a zillion more shade trees on our streets, starting immediately. Those walkable sidewalks are as important as any platforms or turnstiles or escalators or any other piece of equipment we install at a transit station to get transit up and running. Naturally, street trees have been an afterthought in traffic engineering, and cars-only street design has been going on around here for decades. A few years ago, I was asked, what one change could Miami-Dade government make to improve transit ridership? And I said, put the person in charge of growing transit ridership in charge of street design too. Amazingly, the county not long ago reorganized and did just that, creating a proper transportation department for the first time encompassing both transportation and public works. We'll have to see if this results in breaking down the bureaucratic silos that have thwarted walkable street design for a long time. Maybe we'll get to have a car-optional city. Green mobility options require connected networks. For transit, the key is helping people make the first and last mile of their trip so they can get to the transit system. So a linked network for walking and biking is a big part of that. We need a lot more safe, protected, friendly places to walk and ride bikes without the constant threat of being run over. Here's the last block of a popular walking route to the South Miami station. It looked like this in 1992. Now, Dorn Avenue looks like this. Think how many more places there are where this sort of change would be worth making. At the same time, we'll need to be alert to emerging technologies. People are rethinking what a car is, what a train is, and so forth. Driverless cars might be the tip of the iceberg. The important thing is that we get those new gadgets to serve us instead of the other way around. We'll have to be firm about what kind of communities we're trying to build and harness the high technology to help us get them instead of surrendering to the car's needs all over again. Some of the new electronic autonomous vehicles are showing great promise for those first and last miles of our trips. This is a 10 to 15 passenger slow moving electric autonomous vehicle. This kind of tech might allow us to affordably have more smaller shuttles instead of fewer big ones. The future should be all about choices. The most important thing of all, working together. Because all of us. We are traffic.